Hello, this is Mike Griffin. I received an interesting email the other day from an EntitySpaces user who was looking to work on the source code up in GitHub, asking me, what do you think needs done? Where would you take EntitySpaces into the future if you were still working on it full time? And that got me to thinking, and I always had ideas about that. What I would do is make a much smaller version of EntitySpaces. I would make it much more forward-looking, and I would make it very mobile-centric. And I would call it ESLite. And let me explain what we would do. The architectural goals of ESLite are to make it more nimble, which is much smaller, much easier to work with, get rid of the bloat, much more forward-looking architectural-wise, and very collaborative, meaning, of course, now we would have the source code up on GitHub, the ESLite branch or repository, and we would have collaboration on the code generation side as well, which was really pretty much off limits in EntitySpaces. So the community could continue to grow ESLite and even modify, tweak, and work on the templates as well. So let's take a look at the 5 steps. Number 1, I would remove the fat. There's a tremendous amount of fat in EntitySpaces at this point that can be cut. We'll talk about that in a moment, which would make the assembly smaller and the generated code much smaller, and the templates, the new templates that would create the entities, much easier to write and understand. Number 2, I'd make sure that it runs on the iPhone, iPad, Android, and any other tablets that MonoTouch might support in the future. And we already have an EntitySpaces user who has successfully compiled EntitySpaces under MonoTouch and is talking to SQLite on an iPad, and then in offline mode and stuff like that. So that's already easily accomplished. EntitySpaces always actually ran under Mono, so that doesn't surprise me. JSON services. EntitySpaces already has really good support for JSON services, but I would do even more in that area and make it really centered around speaking JSON. Number 4, based on what I've done in the last 6 months on my 2nd generation, which is creating a new site based on EntitySpaces and EntitySpaces.js, I've learned a lot, and I would re-engineer, actually recreate an entirely new JavaScript ORM architecture. Wouldn't take too long, but we'd need some JavaScript guys to help work on that. Would be a great architecture to run under the client and on the mobile devices as well, we'll see. Number 5, code generation. I would stop using the VS plugin. We wouldn't have to compile and ship that. The templates are a nightmare to maintain. It's very hard to compile. And we don't have the same code generation needs with ESLite that we would on EntitySpaces. The templates would be much easier. We'll be generating much less code. And you'll see why here in just a moment. So basically, again, it's nimble, it's more forward-looking, and it's more collaborative. Removing the fat. What can we remove? We would remove the ASP.NET binding support. Hopefully nobody's using ASP.NET server controls and stuff these days. There's great products out there like Wijmo and Kindu UI and things like that to use in a more JavaScript, HTML, HTML5, JSON, jQuery type environment. That's where everybody's going. That's the way I develop now. Again, we could remove the ES data source support as well, because that has to do all with the ASP.NET grids and stuff like that. We would remove the prefetch API from EntitySpaces, which, while it can work, it's clunky, and if you have to throw a where clause in there, forget it. It becomes really complicated, and it also adds a ton of bloat to your generated classes. And if you want to run them on a mobile device, you want to keep it small. We could always reintroduce a new prefetch API when someone thinks of a better way to do it. We would remove the proxy stub support, which is no longer needed. Even in ES 2012, you don't have to use proxy stubs anymore. The main entities themselves serialize directly very well. And there's a bunch of other bloat in there that I know about because obviously I wrote it. But there's a bunch of stuff that can be ripped out of EntitySpaces at this point, having to do with Silverlight and all these other kinds of things, using raw data types and stuff like that. iPhone, iPad, Android, and more. What would we do there? First thing we do is make sure that ESLite is 100% compatible with MonoTouch. And again, we already have a customer, or I should say a user, that's using ES 2012 under MonoTouch, so that's easily accomplished. The SQLite provider will run on all devices, so you can actually have an offline mode, and if the person can't get on a Wi-Fi, you can store your data in a SQLite database, say on an iPad, and then when it connects, ship your data to your server, and that might be running Microsoft SQL, but it doesn't matter because EntitySpaces works in a database independent fashion. Communicate with JSON services. Most people won't use a database on a device. They'll be talking to their server through JSON services, and that will be one of the main focuses of ESLite. The dynamic query API will be available on all these devices, so if you actually want to run under MonoTouch, you can use the dynamic query API, which can serialize and deserialize back and forth between your server. And one code base will run on all devices, so you can have the same code base running on, say, an iPad that's running on your backend server, and that's what this particular user who is already using MonoTouch is doing. And the JavaScript architecture can be used instead of MonoTouch. So that was, I think, step 4. We'll create a new JavaScript architecture. So if you don't want to use the EntitySpaces on the device itself, you just use the JavaScript architecture talking to the WCF service hosted on your server, and that will give you basically the equivalency of EntitySpaces in JavaScript. It won't be EntitySpaces JS, it'll be a new architecture. So then you could have Android, iPhone, iPad, whatever, and ESLite will run on all of them. JSON services. Basically XML is dead and JSON is the future. Web or mobile, it doesn't matter. You want to fetch your data via JSON services. So what would we do? We'd add even better support for WCF JSON services. We have great support already, but we would make some tweaks and make that even better. We would have full support for REST endpoints as well. Extra columns would be automatically injected into your JavaScript objects. Hierarchical support would be there, so you could serialize and deserialize back and forth hierarchical object models. Paging, sorting, and filtering is built into the API. So if you're working with a grid, that will automatically be handled for you. The new JavaScript architecture, what would that be like? It would be based on Knockout 2.2.1 unless a newer version is shipped. It would be optional. You don't have to use Knockout, but I would suggest you probably do that. It's a terrific way to work. There could be potential for the Kindu UI MVVM model, but I'm not sure that we'll get to that. It's kind of on the edge case. Support for REST and WCF endpoints, XHR and AJAX supported, synchronous and asynchronous calls available, hierarchical object models, again, deserialized, serialized, and it'll be pretty smart. It'll prune an object graph and send only the dirty JSON up. And it will support lazy loading, just like the EntitySpaces does on the server side, and row level and column level dirty tracking. Code generation, this is one of the big changes. Code generation for EntitySpaces was always difficult. Of course, it wasn't accessible to the customers because it was compiled in the user interface and assemblies, and they were pretty complicated to look at. But what we'll do now is we'll collaborate. We'll write the templates together. And how do we do that? We'll do it through a cloud-based system, and it's also database independent as well. Templates will be very simple, based on templating languages. There are 3 already supported: Handlebars, Dust, and DOT. Templates can be easily forked, tweaked, and extended by users. There's worldwide instant access when they're published, and everybody can get to them through the cloud. And that's done through my 2nd generation, which I wrote using the very techniques I'm suggesting here, which is really a fantastic way to work. So a lot of the way I like to work is reflected in ESLite. So collaboration is the key. We would be using GitHub to hold the source, my 2nd generation, to collaborate and publish the templates, and then the forums on the brewdog.com site to do technical support, and also to coordinate our collaboration for the entire system. So we need a pretty big team. We need people who can run the Macintosh to run MonoTouch. MonoTouch runs under the Mac, at least the MonoDev for that. We need iPad and Android users to help verify that things are working. We need template authors to help work with my second generation templates, and that's actually very cool. And of course, I could use a couple of really good JavaScript guys to work on the JavaScript architecture. So if we can garner enough volunteers, I'm willing to enable to play a big role in this, but I simply can't afford to do it, or will I attempt to unless there's a big enough community response. So ESLite is going to be using GitHub, which everything would be under the MIT license. It'd be brewdog.com, where we would coordinate everything and have support forums. My second generation would house the templates and where you would do your code generation, and of course we need developers and volunteers to help work on this. Vote with your time and volunteer. Go ahead and hit our brewdog.com forums and let us know what you want to do, or if you have comments on the proposal, just go ahead and make your voice known. So let us know what you think. Thanks. Bye.